everyone, Rachel Weaver here. I am on faculty and staff at Lighthouse Writers Workshop. I've been making a series of videos called The Story of a Book, where I ask debut authors to tell us the story of how their books came to be in the world. So today with us, we have Corie Rosen. She is a poet and a novelist. Her first book of poetry just came out on Wednesday. I don't have any idea what day this is. I think it's Friday. It's Friday, so 2 days ago. Let's see, the title of your book of poetry is For Things Left Unsaid. So Corie, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell us a little bit about your process. You know, any part of the process you'd like to talk about would be awesome. Anything from sort of this idea that you had all the way through publication. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be part of this series. I think it's really amazing that Lighthouse is keeping people connected via online. I've been finding a lot of solace in going to this website for various things, so I'm super appreciative. This book was such a surprise. I was working on a novel and I really felt like I needed a pause to come back to poetry. And in the course of about 3.5 months, I sat down and wrote hundreds of pieces of poetry. This was right after the election and the transition to the current presidential administration, I can't speak. And I was also going through some personal stuff. I was going through IVF at the time, and I just really felt like this world that I'd been living in that was really stable and solid had all of a sudden fallen apart in ways I had not been able to predict. And it seemed like everywhere I turned, the language of my life was totally different. Like the language of politics was totally different. The language of my medical experiences was totally different. The language in my marriage was totally different. And I started to really feel like the fiction forms I was using, writing short stories and working on this novel, were like kind of failing to give me solace for that. And so I wrote these couple hundred poems, most of which were actually political poems about the way language was failing and had been used in my family. I have like Russian Jewish immigrant history, and I have a great uncle who was a Holocaust survivor. And I was writing this book all about language. And in the course of writing it, I ended up writing all these love poems, which I'm sure you didn't see coming. And when I went back through it, I realized that the love poems were like their own project, which surprised me. They didn't cohere at all with the rest of the book I thought I was writing. And so I took them out, and then more or less on a dare from my writing group, I sent them out. And I really thought they were kind of a chapbook. It's a really short book. And I only sent it to 4 places. It met the minimum threshold for a full-length book for one of the 4 publishers. And in 2.5 months, they got back to me and said, you know, here's your publication contract and your timeline. And I had a book. So it was really wild and has been kind of wild. The editorial process ended up coinciding with the birth of my daughter. So I was dealing with a newborn, getting up at night and trying to make really precise, detailed edits at the same time, and was sort of have been and still am kind of stunned. Like I kept expecting them to call me and say, you know, oh, just kidding, we made a mistake. That was someone else's manuscript. But here it is in the world. And I'm so grateful in a way that it was the sort of love poems and the personal poems that made their way out, because I think particularly for me right now, like that's the stuff I'm reading, coming back to poets who are talking about everyday life and what's beautiful and harrowing and difficult about everyday life, because I just can't get my brain around really big ideas at the moment. So I'm hoping that it's finding its way into the world at the right time and in the right way for it.
The thing that strikes me as so interesting in what you're saying is, well, first of all, the fact that it came out so quick, right? It sounds like you wrote, you know, lots and lots of poems all within a short period of time. And then also the fact that you gleaned some of them. So it sounds like you had to write all of them to get the ones that came together in a
Very
collection.
sad. Yes.
And so are you doing anything, do you have plans to do anything else with the others that remain? I mean, are you thinking about like a separate collection for those, or do you think those were just a part of the process to be able to write the ones that came together in this particular book?
Yeah, I kind of that. So I took those poems and organized them and gave them a structure and a title and formatted them into a manuscript. And actually some of them have been published in individual journals. And I submitted them to a couple of contests, and they did make their way into like the winnowed pool in a couple, but didn't win. And then really just as this book is coming out, and I think what I'm interested in is changing. So the timeline, I wrote the poems really quickly. Like I sat and wrote poetry just kind of all day, every day. I had just left a job and the world had fallen apart. I really needed kind of like the solace of the shorter form. And one of my poetry teachers used to say, like, fiction is about expansion and the journey, and poetry is about compression and distillation. And we could debate whether that is always true forever, because these poems are actually like a narrative, kind of like take an epic, if you will, permit me, structure. But the other poems, they felt like a book to me for a long time. And now that I'm looking back at them, I think there is the kernel of, I think, a book I'm now working on in there. But I don't know that those pieces are themselves the book, which has been thrilling and surprising or disheartening. Because I'm like, oh, now I have to write another, 200 pages of work to get, whatever comes out of it. But I think in writing this little book, I realized, like, I'm a huge Anne Carson fan, and it never really made a lot of sense to me because I'm not a classicist or particularly passionate about the classics, and so much of what she does is rooted in, mythology, and these classic structures. But I realized I'm really interested in the form of the modern, like, epic poem, like taking what is maybe even a free verse structure and building a narrative with it that echoes this ancient form but is itself a new thing. That's what I think I realize I'm trying to do. And that's what I was attempting to do in the very first iteration of this first book. And it was too disjointed because it had too many narrative threads. And so now what I'm doing, I'm going back and I'm saying there's one really compelling narrative for me here that everything else I was trying to sort of fit around. And even though some of those poems I think are really nice poems, they don't get to live in that narrative. And when you say fast, like, I did write the core material really quickly, but I actually sat down and wrote most of this stuff now almost like 3.5 years ago. So the journey from like the writing to the acceptance was probably 1.5 years. And then it's been another almost 18 months, I think, in waiting for editorial, going through the editorial process, and finally getting it out. It's been a huge amount of work and waiting, like work, work, for this really small thing. So I'm like so grateful and awed by everyone who works in publishing and as an editor, because I have been so helped along through the process by those people at this press.
And what's the name of the press?
It's Kelsey Book. Have a number. They're a small independent publisher out of Utah, so right in our neighborhood, and they have a number of imprints. They have they actually run a forms contest for books that are classical forms, and the lead editor there is herself a poet. She published a book where she uses all classical forms, so they're really interested in form and structure, and I think that's probably why we ended up being a match, even though I didn't realize it at the time.
How'd you find out about them?
Yeah, so I used poets and writers, and I was submitting. I didn't know what I was doing, and I've since talked to some friends who are like very accomplished poets. I had been spending a lot of my energy in fiction with the short story and working on this novel, and so I'd sort of fallen off a little bit with poetry. And I'm in a writing group. I can't recommend this highly enough. I'm in a writing group where the core function of the group is to set goals and hold people accountable. And there are writers at all levels in the group. Like there's a woman who's a successful memoirist, and then there's someone else who's really kind of starting out. And every month we meet and we talk about either someone else's work, someone outside of the group, and we look at why something works and how it works, or we workshop something. But the real juice is we set goals, and then halfway through the month, the woman who runs the group checks in and says, "Hey, how are you doing on your goals?" And you go, "Oh, I said I was going to send this and I didn't." So I had said I had this weird little motley book and I was going to send it out because I didn't have anything else to set as a goal because I had published all my short stories and it felt like the right goal. And I used Poets and Writers, their database. And I went through and I made a list of presses that were taking submissions at that time. And then I looked at what people had published and I chose a handful that seemed like they would be a good fit. And I went from there. I didn't at the time feel like I had the stomach for like 100 rejection letters all at once. So I was very lucky. I mean, it was such a lucky choice and a lucky match. I know that lots of things I have published have had to be submitted and submitted and submitted and submitted until I'm like in the dark night of the soul moment, and then miraculously, an editor reaches out through the ether and says, "Hey, I liked this." But this happened more quickly for me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Corie, and congratulations on having a book out. It's super exciting, especially that it just happened a couple of days ago. Congrats.
Thank you so much. It's a lot for me anyway.
Yeah. All right, well, take care.
Thank you. Bye.